My name is Michael Hart, and for most of my 33 years, I believed I knew my father better than anyone else. He was a man of order, of routines, and carefully chosen words. He built a business from nothing, carved out respect in our town, and carried himself with a certainty that made people either admire him or fear him. At home, he was strict but consistent. He valued discipline, hated excuses, and expected nothing short of loyalty from his family. To me, he was the man who taught me how to tie a tie, how to shake a hand firmly, and how to look someone in the eye when I spoke. He had flaws, of course, but don't all fathers? I thought I knew the measure of him, even when we clashed. But on his 60th birthday, with dozens of friends and relatives gathered under one roof, I realized just how little I really knew. The night began with laughter and clinking glasses. My mother had worked for weeks to organize the celebration. A grand affair at a banquet hall, filled with flowers, candlelight, and the warm hum of conversation. Cousins I hadn't seen in years hugged me at the door. Aunts kissed my cheeks. My younger sister Emma flitted around in a sparkling dress, playing hostess beside Mom. Dad was in his element, standing tall in a tailored suit, shaking hands, slapping backs, laughing at old stories told by lifelong friends. He looked younger than his years that night, a man proud of his accomplishments, soaking in the admiration he believed he'd earned. Dinner was served, toasts were made. My uncle told a story about Dad in his 20s, hustling to get his first contract. Emma made everyone laugh with a slideshow of childhood pictures. Dad holding me as a newborn, Dad teaching her to ride a bike. My mother wiped her eyes discreetly at the head table. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for: the cake. The staff dimmed the lights as waiters carried in a towering white cake, glowing with 60 lit candles. Everyone began singing, a chorus of voices filling the room, warm and off-key, as Dad stood with a smile that stretched wide across his face. But when the cake was set down in front of him and the lights lifted again, the smile died. There, written in smooth, deliberate strokes of blue icing, was a name none of us recognized: Daniel. At first, there was confusion. A murmur ran through the room. Some relatives leaned closer to see if they'd misread it. My mother frowned, her hand hovering over her wine glass. Emma squinted, tilting her head. And my father froze. The color drained from his face. His eyes locked on the cake as though it were some kind of apparition. His hand, holding a crystal glass of champagne, trembled. A moment later, the glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the floor. The singing faltered and died into silence. I will never forget that sound, the shattering of glass in a room where no one dared to speak. 60 candles flickered, reflected in his wide, panicked eyes. Someone cleared their throat. A cousin whispered, "Who's Daniel?" Dad didn't answer. He didn't laugh it off, didn't make a joke, didn't even move. He just stood there, paralyzed, like a man who had seen a ghost. My mother reached out for his arm, but he pulled away too quickly, as if her touch burned him. He mumbled something under his breath, something none of us could catch, and then turned on his heel and walked out of the room. The hall erupted into whispers. Guests exchanged puzzled looks. My mother's face turned pale as parchment, while Emma bit her lip, clearly torn between following Dad or staying by Mom's side. I sat there, my fork suspended in midair, my heart pounding, because in that single, frozen moment, I saw something I had never seen on my father's face before: fear. Not the controlled, tempered anger he sometimes wore. Not the sharpness of disappointment he reserved for us when we failed him. No, this was something deeper. Something raw. That name on the cake, Daniel, wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't some bakery mix-up or silly prank. No, the look in my father's eyes told me everything I needed to know. That name meant something. Something terrible. The room remained tense after he left. A few guests tried to smooth things over, making light-hearted jokes about cake decorations and surprises, but the unease was thick, suffocating. The rest of the evening dragged like a funeral, with laughter forced and smiles brittle. I left early, unable to shake the image of my father's face. As I walked out into the night air, the question burned hotter and hotter inside me. Who was Daniel? And why did the name make my father, the man who never flinched, who never cracked, look as if the world had just collapsed beneath his feet? I didn't know it then, but the answer to that question would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, and about the man I called Dad.
The morning after my father's birthday party, the house was quieter than I had ever heard it. No clattering of dishes from the kitchen, no hum of my mother's voice as she planned her day, no booming footsteps of my father on the stairs. Just silence, heavy and thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. I sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee, staring at the muted patterns of light spilling across the counter. My phone buzzed with messages from cousins and family friends who had been at the party. "Do you know who Daniel is? Is everything okay with your dad? That was strange. You good?" I ignored most of them. The truth was, I didn't know who Daniel was, and no, I wasn't good. When my mother finally came downstairs, her hair pulled back in a tight bun and her face pale, she didn't look at me right away. She went straight for the coffee pot, poured herself a cup, and leaned against the counter. Her eyes darted toward me once, then quickly away. "Where's Dad?" I asked. "He's at the office," she said, too quickly. It was Sunday. My father never worked on Sundays. I waited for her to explain, but she didn't. She just sipped her coffee in silence, her fingers trembling slightly against the mug. "Mom," I said carefully, "what happened last night?" Her grip tightened. "Nothing happened." "Nothing?" I set my cup down hard enough that it rattled on the saucer. "The man dropped a glass and walked out of his own birthday party because of one word on a cake. Don't tell me nothing happened." She pressed her lips together, refusing to meet my eyes. "It was a mistake. The bakery must have mixed up the name." We both knew that was a lie. I let the silence stretch, hoping she'd crack. But she didn't. She just stood there, rigid, as if she could will the conversation away. Finally, she muttered, "Leave it alone, Michael. Your father doesn't want this discussed." And that was it. She walked out of the kitchen, leaving me with a cold cup of coffee and a knot tightening in my chest. Later that day, Emma called. Her voice was tight, anxious. "Mike, what the hell was that last night?" "I'd tell me. You're closer to Mom. Did she say anything?" "Only that Dad was upset. But come on, you saw his face. That wasn't just upset. That was..." She trailed off. "Fear," I finished for her. "Yes, exactly. Who is Daniel?" I wanted to tell her I had no idea, but the truth was more complicated. I didn't know who Daniel was, but I knew he mattered. Whoever he was someone my father had tried very hard to bury. "I'm going to find out," I told her. "Be careful," Emma whispered. "You know how Dad gets when someone pushes too hard. Don't make him shut you out completely." But I wasn't worried about being shut out. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had the upper hand. Because my father had slipped. The man who built his entire life on control had let a single name destroy him in front of 50 people. And I wasn't about to let it go. That night, I went to the study. My father's study was a fortress. Dark oak shelves lined with leather-bound books, a heavy desk, and drawers locked tight. But I had grown up in that house. I knew his habits. I knew the spare key taped beneath the bottom drawer. I waited until the house was quiet, then slipped inside. The drawers were filled with the usual business contracts, financial statements, neatly organized folders. But in the bottom drawer, behind a stack of old tax documents, I found a manila envelope. There was no label, no neat handwriting, just an envelope sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were photographs. Faded, worn photographs of a young boy. The first one showed him standing in a backyard I didn't recognize, no older than 7 or 8, holding a toy truck. His smile was wide and innocent, but his eyes were my father's. I flipped through more photos, birthdays, school portraits, a Christmas morning. Always the same boy, always with that same resemblance. On the back of one photo, in my father's handwriting, was a single word: Daniel. My chest tightened, my breath came shallow. I sat there staring at that name, written in the same sharp script my father used to sign checks, write memos, scrawl his initials on notes. Daniel wasn't just some bakery mistake. Daniel was real. And judging by the dates scrawled faintly on the backs of the photos, Daniel had been real for decades, which meant my father had been hiding him for just as long. The next morning, I drove to the office where Dad spent most of his days. His secretary, an older woman who had worked for him since I was a teenager, looked startled when I walked in. "He's not available," she said quickly. I smiled tightly. "I'm not here for business." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Michael, it's best if you don't press him right now. He's unsettled." "Unsettled about what?" She bit her lip. "Some things are better left in the past." There it was again, that same wall of silence, that same refusal to speak. I thanked her politely and left, but my resolve only hardened. If my father wanted this buried, then I would dig. That night, I called an old family friend, someone who had known my father since they were young men. Mr. Thompson had always been kind to me, the sort of man who slipped you a $20 at Christmas with a wink. When I asked him about Daniel, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Michael, where did you hear that name?" I admitted it was on Dad's birthday cake, and I found photos. Another pause. I could hear his breathing through the receiver. "I shouldn't be the one to tell you this, but if you found the photos, then you already know more than most. All I'll say is, your father made choices when he was younger, choices he spent his whole life trying to erase." "What kind of choices?" I pressed. But he wouldn't answer. "Be careful, son," he said quietly. "The truth has a way of burning everything around it." Then he hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the photographs spread across my nightstand. Daniel's eyes stared back at me, haunting and familiar. For the first time, I wondered, did he know about us? Did he know about me, about Emma, about the family that had been allowed to exist while he was, what, cast aside, forgotten? And if he did know, did he hate us for it? I didn't know it then, but those questions were about to be answered. And when the answers came, they would shatter the fragile foundation my family had built our lives on. Because Daniel wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was real. He was alive. And he was coming.
The photographs haunted me for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the boy staring back at me, frozen in time, with that same unmistakable resemblance to my father, Daniel. The silence in our house grew heavier with each passing hour. My mother pretended nothing was wrong. Emma called constantly, desperate for answers I couldn't give her yet. And my father avoided me entirely. He left before dawn, returned long after midnight, his study locked tight. But secrets don't stay buried forever. It was Emma who broke the silence first. She came to my apartment one rainy afternoon, her hair plastered to her face, her cheeks streaked with tears. "Mike," she said, her voice breaking, "I found something." She handed me a folder, an old hospital record she dug out of a box in the attic. Inside was a birth certificate, my father's name listed clearly under father. The mother was someone we didn't recognize, and the child's name, Daniel Hart. I sat down hard, the paper trembling in my hands. "It's real," Emma whispered. "He's real." I looked up at her, my throat tight. "Why would Dad hide this?" She shook her head. "That's not all, Michael. Look at the dates." I scanned the paper. Daniel had been born 2 years before me. 2 years before my parents married. Emma's face twisted. That means Dad had a son before us," I said quietly, "and he abandoned him." The days that followed felt like living inside a storm. I tried to confront my father, but he stonewalled me at every turn. My mother begged me to drop it. Emma was torn between anger and heartbreak. But then came the letter. It arrived in the mail, no return address, just my name scrawled across the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words written in sharp, steady handwriting. "I am your brother." And beneath it, an address. I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell Emma. I drove to the address alone, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. It was a modest house on the edge of town, weathered but neat. A man stood on the porch, waiting. He looked to be in his late 30s, his hair darker than mine, his shoulders broad. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They were my father's eyes. He stepped forward as I got out of the car, and for a long moment we just stared at each other. "You must be Michael," he said at last. His voice was calm, steady. I swallowed hard. "Daniel?" He nodded. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The same jawline, the same sharpness in the brow. For a moment, I felt dizzy, like the ground beneath me had tilted. This wasn't just some abstract mystery anymore. This was flesh and blood. This was family. Inside his home, he poured us coffee and told me the truth. Our father had met his mother when he was young, before the business, before the success, before the carefully constructed life he built with my mother. They were in love, he said, or at least that's what his mother had believed. But when she became pregnant, everything changed. "He walked away," he said flatly. He told her he had other plans, that he couldn't have a child holding him back, so he left her and me. My stomach twisted. "He never came back," Daniel continued, "never paid support, never visited, never even acknowledged me. My mother raised me alone. She died a few years ago, still bitter, still broken. But he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, but I never forgot his name. And when I turned 18, I started digging. I followed his career, his family. I watched him play the perfect husband, the perfect father, and I waited." "For what?" I asked quietly. "For him to face me. For him to admit what he did." I thought of my father's face at the party, the way he'd frozen at the sight of that name on the cake. "That was you, wasn't it? The cake." Daniel smiled faintly. I had to get his attention somehow. In the weeks that followed, the truth detonated like a bomb in our family. Daniel didn't stay silent anymore. He came to the house, stood on the porch, and demanded to see our father. Neighbors whispered, relatives called, my mother wept behind closed doors. And my father crumbled. The man who had built an empire, who commanded boardrooms and silenced crowds, suddenly seemed small. He refused to answer the door. He shouted when pressed, then retreated into silence. Finally, it was at the lawyer's office where everything came to a head. We gathered for what was supposed to be a routine update on estate matters. My father sat stiffly at the head of the table, my mother beside him, Emma and I across from them. And then Daniel walked in. The room went still. My father's face turned ashen, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Daniel sat down calmly, his gaze locked on the man who had abandoned him. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Hart, as you know, we've reviewed the estate documents, but there are new considerations. Mr. Daniel Hart has come forward with evidence of paternity. Legally, he is entitled to recognition." My father's hand slammed the table. "No," he barked. "This is a mistake. This is enough," Daniel cut in, his voice sharp as steel. "You can deny me all you want, but I exist. I am your brother, and I will not be erased." The words echoed through the room. For the first time in my life, I saw my father truly defeated, not by competitors, not by business failures, but by the truth. He lowered his head, his shoulders sagging, and in that moment he looked old, so much older than 60. The man who had spent his life building walls of control around himself was finally exposed. In the weeks that followed, nothing was the same. My mother struggled with betrayal, her marriage shaken to its core. Emma, heartbroken, tried to make peace with a brother she'd never known. And me? I found myself caught between anger and understanding. I had grown up believing my father was unshakable, but now I saw him for what he really was, a man capable of weakness, of cruelty, of abandonment. Daniel didn't want money, he didn't want property, he wanted acknowledgement. And he got it. The night before Daniel left town, we sat together on his porch again. "You waited all these years," I said quietly. "Why?" He looked out at the darkened street. "Because secrets rot families from the inside. I wasn't going to let him bury me like that. The truth matters, Michael, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts." I nodded slowly. As I drove home that night, I thought about everything that had happened. The cake, the fear in my father's eyes, the photographs, the truth finally dragged into the light. My family would never be the same, but maybe that was the point. Because lies can build empires, but truth tears them down. And if you take nothing else from this story, take this. Secrets don't stay secrets forever. Sooner or later, they find their way to the light.